So today I'm going to talk. I really like this presentation. I have a number of presentations that I do, but this one really approaches measurement and analytics, from an area of learning to fly the plane before landing the plane. I think in measurement, a lot of people just want to get to the end, land that plane, but if you don't know how to fly it, that's not going to be a pretty situation. So I'm going to take a high level approach, talk about some of the issues in the industry, why measurement is more important than ever, why communications, our profession is more important than ever, some of the challenges we face, and some things that we can do to bring our measurement program to life. And of course, some great, a couple case studies so you can see some things in action. And I also have one of the things that people ask me probably the most is about technology. So I also help our own agency with our MarTech stack. I'm speaking to technology solutions across the board, across channels consistently. I think I've had 5 calls today already. Just keeping a pulse on that, as that's super important to our business and a lot of the things that we do. So there is my glamour shot before my COVID hit hair. If you want to tweet during this, at bdiggs or at Allison+PR, please follow me on LinkedIn. I like to make a lot of new friends, answer questions. If we're connected on LinkedIn and you have a question, always feel free just to shoot it over. And as soon as I can get to them, I can point you in the right direction, give you a couple thoughts. I'm always happy to do that. And it's one of the reasons I like speaking. I think, measurement and analytics is so important to our growing agency or growing industry. Couple key takeaways. I'd like to start with this. I think, like I mentioned, the opportunity and responsibility of communications is greater than ever. And there's a lot of factors. When I gave this presentation before COVID, it had the same key takeaway, but after that and everything that's gone in our society, that's even accelerated. Data and measurement need to be strategic. I think a lot of people approach measurement as, let's do that at the end of the program, or maybe someone needs to see a report at some time. And they don't tie that with strategy. Those two things should be interwoven at all times. When you're talking about strategy, the person who's doing measurement should be directly tied in, and vice versa. Because if you don't have that good strategic direction, you're not going to have great measurement. So one thing, technology, as I mentioned, that's really providing a lot of opportunity for us, and why I'm on the phone and talking to people all the time. But it's also complicating things. These technology solutions are becoming so complex that it really takes a strong skill set to be able to use them, understand them, and use them effectively. I see a lot of people buy Ferraris all the time, but they don't know how to back them out of the garage. These technology solutions are becoming powerful machines that take a lot of expertise to use, particularly as you move into cross-channel metrics. So we are, I believe, at the biggest fork in industry history. We have a lot of things that are being put our way. I think when you saw on the poll, the responsibility, 5 or 10 years ago was mainly in media relations, internal communications. Social media was just popping. But now, even on the poll, and that's why I like to look at that question, you see the responsibility of all the people in this group, whether it's website, influencer, all the different things that we saw in the poll. We have a lot more responsibility than we ever had. Also, brand protections at a premium. When we talk about our current societal makeup, people look at brands in a different way than they did in the past. And a lot of that function falls to communications. So we're in charge oftentimes of protecting a brand, protecting an entity, something that's been built up. And I say brand, that could be government, that could be, anything. Storytelling has become a premium. It's no more just push ads. It's about the overall story. I think, if you read studies, and I've read many, and I'm sure you've seen the same ones, that people are more apt to buy or work with a company or use their services or donate if you're a nonprofit, if they really have trust and hear your story and believe in your story. And that's also tied with authenticity. Authenticity is becoming more important in the influencer world and media relations. People can really see through companies who don't have these things. So that's great. We have more responsibility than ever. But with that responsibility, comes this need for measurement. On the other side, we also have some macro challenges. We have greater budget scrutiny, especially in these times when I was talking to Andrea, there's some industries that are extremely hard hit in this pandemic, and have had to cut budgets, and they look at the place where they can't show measurable results. It's a very practical thing. I've seen it over and over again. I want to help you guys so to make sure that you can preserve your budget, you can preserve your resources among this greater budget scrutiny. CMO tenure remains low. Often communications reports through the CMO. So if they keep changing, it's difficult to get any traction. We have C-suite involvement. It's often tied to this greater budget scrutiny, where they're looking at every single piece of finance data and seeing if it's measurable, what they're getting in return, and what that actually means. We see margins declining. Obviously, COVID has had a huge impact on a lot of different things and accelerated all these macro challenges. And then we have a changing industry and workplace as well. People are working from home. A lot of our clients have indicated they're working from home at least till the middle of next year. Some have said that they are working at home permanently. This has changed our entire workplace and how we may need to communicate with people. So that's just the setup. So really, when we look at this concert view, the opportunity is for us to shine. And I really think that's in data and measurement. That's something that we can get ahead. I think we as an industry can do better. I like to help do presentations like this, help my clients, and just talk about this because there's such great opportunity. And the next slides are really going to go into showing you how to approach flying that airplane. One thing that I'm not going to do is, hey, here's the silver bullet for your organization, because as you saw in the makeup of this group that we're all part of today, you have people from different industries. Some might, their goal might be raising funds. Others might be communicating internally. Others might be creating leads for new business. All those things require much different metrics, all measurable, but in different ways. So for me to just to come in and say, hey, this is the one silver bullet for all of communications with that expanding responsibility is something that I don't think is right and I don't do. Maybe 10 years ago, it was much easier and more palatable to do because we only had, maybe one or two channels of responsibility, but that has changed as you saw from the poll. So here's the path forward. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each of these three pillars, but the first one is defining your role in your organization. This is the most difficult thing, and I find the thing that people have the most difficult time with when they're talking about measurement, but again, at that strategy level, and I'll get into that in a second. Being more strategic, defining your objectives and goals. I think if you've followed or read anything about measurement, this is still one of the core pillars and still something that people don't do often and often don't do well. Preparing a data strong communication structure. That's the third thing. Again, as this becomes more complex, as more resources are put towards it, and you actually want to do it, you have to have a certain mindset. You have to have certain tools and expertise to start to think about this to get it where you want to be. So let's talk about defining your role. This is a question I ask frequently, amongst prospects, amongst clients, among non-clients. When I ask the simple question, what is your role, communications, PR, within your organization? Usually there is not a great answer, or it's 50 answers. If we can't define our role in an organization, we're going to have a hard time showing our value. So it's a really philosophical question, and it's different for each organization, and it might require greater conversations and thinking, but a really strategic approach. Because if you say your role is raising funds or accelerating that or creating awareness, probably the most common top of the funnel thing that communications does, thought leadership, protecting that brand, if it's social and influencer, all these different things, you have to define your role. And this is one of the most important things. These three things that I am talking about, the three blue bubbles, lead to that solid foundation so that we can actually do measurement. And they all tie together. So the first thing is defining your role. I encourage everybody to go back, think about that, because it's going to be different for each of you. The next part is upping the strategy. So being more strategic, defining your objectives and goals. How many times, this is a planning season, I know for a lot of people, just on the calendar year, are you going back and setting strategic direction and tying that directly to objectives and goals. Some common things that we see, are just reaching the target audiences. These are just samples. There could be hundreds of different things. And I think that's why people get hung up in measurement, because they have a difficult time defining their role, and they have a difficult time defining their goals, and they end up just reporting back metrics that are standard. And I don't think they're really satisfied with that. But if you can define your role and define your goals, you have a strong position to do great measurement. So again, once you define your role, hey, I want to create more awareness. Now, what are your goals in creating more awareness? Well, I want to reach new target audiences. Great. Now we can measure impact amongst target audiences, whether that's just something as simple as media mentions, whether it's internal communications and we're seeing an increase in content consumption, or if we do a brand and perception survey and ask our target audience, have you seen us more? I mean, three simple ways just to measure reaching target audiences, for example. I think a lot of people in this atmosphere are looking to change the conversation, change the conversation about their business, maybe by need due to COVID, or maybe they've changed for other reasons, like social injustice. They had a new strategy for becoming more diverse in their organization, or implementing new things that they haven't in the past, or thinking about things in new ways. So, I'll get into a couple examples and show some conversation or text analytics. I think text analytics and conversation change is one of the things that clients that I'm seeing and in the industry are asking for more as people and organizations change during this dynamic time. More deeper down the funnel, are you influencing a purchase or action, right? You want to change opinion? Are you delivering key messages? Again, these are just sample objectives and goals that you need to define. And, after that, then you start building the metrics. If you don't, again, have that role and have those goals, you can't define metrics that mean anything worthwhile. So once we have the roles and goals, how are we going to actually execute this? As I mentioned, especially those of you with multiple data sources, right? You have a website, you have social, you have earned media, internal communications. All of these different areas are becoming more data complex. There's more robust data, and it's accessible to many of us. Do you know how to collect it? Do you know how to store it? Are you hiring talent that has maybe a good passion for data and measurement? Because a lot of people don't. And we learned that very quickly. A lot of organizations, a lot of people come into marketing and communications because they really enjoy the creative side, the strategic thinking, and all the great things that marketing and communications do. And when they see a spreadsheet, or when they see math, or let alone advanced analytics, it's something they don't enjoy doing. And they, therefore, oftentimes don't do it very well. Also, having the right effort. If you want a robust measurement report, I think if I remember the graphic correctly, most people are spending less than 5%. You're not going to get a heck of a lot of good measurement if you don't devote resources, just like anything else in life. So I would, if you work or are with an organization that's really data and metrics driven, make sure you devote resources that meet that. We see it across the board. Some organizations say, it's not really important to us, just give us a standard report and call it a day. I think we're seeing a trend of people coming in, especially young CEOs or data-driven organizations and and tech, but across the board, because for the past 20 years, business schools have been teaching the importance of data and digital transformation and a data-driven approach. So that education and that approach to business that really entered strongly, let's say from 2000, 2005 onward, is taking hold in executive positions, and people are asking for this more and more. So again, if you have a data-driven organization, make sure you have the right effort and resources, and also the right mindset, right? We're going to do measurement, and we're going to do measurement well. And you have to have that become a culture part of the organization amongst your small teams. I know there's 1 or 2 person teams out there as well. But it's again devoting that resource. Instead of giving less than 5%, we're going to give 10%. We're going to give 15% to measurement in the upcoming year because we want to be a data strong communication structure. So now we've arrived. We have the four pillars. You know your role, you know the goals, you have the structure and the comm structure to actually execute on measurement. What do we do next? And this is the approach, again, I take often, depending on where a client's at, but this is probably the most common approach I'd say. The first thing is, and this again is a very difficult question, crafting a data-driven story. If I were to ask you at the end of the day for your job, what story do you want to tell that shows success? In one or two sentences, are you able to do that? Often I find that people aren't able to do that, or the two sentences turn into 5 paragraphs. You should be able to tell a data-driven story in 2 or 3 sentences. We increased revenue amongst new target audiences and gained market share, right? Something as simple as that. So you just want that high level data-driven story. I know there's sometimes that you have multiple responsibilities, but again, if you're doing it well, you're laddering it up to one single goal, your one single role at the organization, protecting the brand, creating awareness, creating leads, whatever it may be. Once you have your data-driven story, again, and I encourage people very practically, can you please go back and just write 2 or 3 sentences on what your data-driven story is? If you can do that as a key takeaway from this presentation, when you think about measurement for your next iteration or next year, I think that's a great first step. Once you have your data-driven story, what is the data that's going to actually back that up? Okay, we want to increase revenue. How are we going to look at that? Do we need to talk to somebody else within our organization to gather that data? Maybe check that off. That's too hard, or that silo is too much to climb, and you revise your data-driven story. Maybe you can get that information and then you have a much stronger data-driven story. But figure out where within your organization or within your access the data lies. Again, if you're doing website, you have your Google Analytics set up correctly. If you're doing earned media, do you have a media monitoring process or technology in place? Same with social media, etc. So think about, again, the story, but then you need the data to tell the story. So that's called data structure, data collection, data cleansing. It sounds complex. It doesn't have to be super complex at all. It can just be, we call scrubbing a grid, right? For earned media, very simple. But if you have multiple channels you're responsible for, like I mentioned earlier, they all have different data. You have to identify that, make sure you can access that. The third thing is create a consumable report. I see a lot of people, I actually did a small survey among executives. All of them unequivocally, I forget the exact percentages, above 90%, said they want their dashboards and information 3 pages or less. Most people are reading 1 page. I still see a lot of reports that are 20, 30, 40, 50 pages long. If it's going up to the executive level, likely not being read, at least according to our study and anecdotal that I receive almost every day. So when you're creating a report, is it a dashboard format? Every organization is different. If you're a finance-driven organization or government entity, that might be more traditional. Some people like those reports in Excel. That's what they're used to. That's how they get their information. Do you work at a visual organization? Maybe it's something created in PowerPoint or a different platform. Or if you're at a data driven organization, is it something in Tableau, a data visualization tool like that, or Microsoft BI, or there's millions out there that feeds into something greater. So remember, create that consumable report based on what your organization wants, but also think about where it may go. And of course, once that's all done and you show how much value and great information, revenue, how you're changing opinions, ask for more budget. I think that's one of the key takeaways, and maybe it's not more budget for everyone's case, but more resources. Make sure that you have all the tools that you need. I think the one thing we found during this pandemic is that if you're able to show value in any ways, raising more funds for nonprofits, raising more revenue or contributing to revenue, making sure that the public is informed, people will shift resources to things that's working, and they'll take away resources from things that are not. So keep that in mind, especially as we look into, Andrea and I were talking a little bit about the pandemic, and a lot of people I think thought, it would be over by now, but we still don't know the future. And this is going to be a continual downward pressure, maybe economic slowdown again too, where this is still going to become super important. A few more slides here. I think slotted for about 20 minutes. So let's take a look at, I always like to provide examples. We saw the path forward, putting it in action, but I think a lot of people like to see, hey, here, what are some things you're doing, or what are some ways to think about different things? And I chose a couple different, not popular, it's much more, it's a lot of times easier to go towards a big company and show something that's really easy to do. But I picked a couple of things that aren't. So this one is a conversation analysis, where we actually use text analytics to look at the conversation. You can see the data-driven story. Again, one sentence there up at the top. This is for an insurance company. The communications team will help shift the conversation about our company by inserting key messages into media consumed by target audiences. Great. So that was their data-driven story they wanted to tell at the end of the year. That's something that they pitched to their executives, and the executives in marketing, whoever they may be, said, this is going to be great because if we shift the conversation, we're going to generate more sales. So their starting benchmark, one of the most important things, again, please benchmark if you haven't already. Whatever metrics you do, you're going to have to benchmark so you can show progress against them. You can see the starting benchmark here. So using text analytics, conversation analysis, we're able to look at the text that rises to the top when talking about this insurance company. We saw that business needs and requirements, there's high conversation there. And you can see down the line, loss control at the very bottom, New Jersey workers' rights laws, workers' compensation, those are least conversation, but not very important to them. But they wanted to insert two new messages. And that is, we have a new claims app. The new claims app allows people to file claims quickly, get it processed, make their customers happy. And you also see that message of quick processing and payouts. Again, very important to their business is their business thought about how do they serve their customers best. And it goes back to a little bit what we were talking about earlier about brand trust, reputation. And they were able to show that they have clearly changed the conversation. Something like the new claims app, which wasn't in the conversation at the front, is now prominent in the conversation. Quick processing and payouts, which wasn't in the conversation at the front, is now in the conversation. And again, these two things, business data showed that if they were able to show these messages and get people to start talking about this, it would generate more business for them. So you can see that there's a clear outcome. This is using text analytics as an approach. Your goal is changing conversation, for example. This one is for government, and I'm glad there's a lot of government people on here. So this one was about highway trash. The communications team will help reduce highway trash by reaching target audiences that incite behavior change through a compelling multi-channel approach. So this one, we measured multiple levels. The first level is awareness and behavior change. How did we do that? That's through an annual survey. Again, we wanted to incite that behavior change, so we did a benchmark. We did something at the end, so we were able to show that measurement. We also wanted to show in that data-driven story that we reduced trash collection or trash on the highways. So we had to work with the Department of Transportation to gather data that lived in a different place about the number of trash bags collected on the side of the road, and including factors like population growth. If the population grew from 10 to 20, there might naturally be more trash. So using a little bit of analytics and making sure that we were good there, but that data is available. They pay somebody to come out, collect the trash, that person counts it, again, connecting those silos. Then what was the cost impact of trash collection, right? We reduced trash collection. Now we don't have to pay the company X amount of dollars to continually go out there on this taxpayer-funded program and spend more money collecting trash. Perfect. Now we have a really good story we're telling. And then looking at correlation statistical analytics to show the relationship between our survey and the trash reduction. The third level is, I think, where most people, operate, and that's the campaign performance. So the campaign performance by channel, website clicks, social media clicks, advertisement calls to action, microsites, etc. So more of those baseline metrics, the engagements, the awareness, and again, those calls to action completed. I think that level 3 is where most people end, but we really want to get to level 2 and 1 of true outcomes. In this case, the outcome was awareness and behavior change combined with the physical trash reduction as well. So again, a 3-level approach, but with clear outcomes, a data-driven story. We didn't rely on level 3, which were just the KPIs. We strategically thought about it and up-leveled to strategically, and also, we were able to then measure that very well. And they were able to share it in news media, taxpayers, with a lot of different interested parties. So the last phase here, I'll talk about technology and tools. Like I said, it is one of the most common things that I get. So just spend a couple things here for you to maybe check out, put on your list, set up a demo. I have relationships with all of these companies. I'm not paid by any of them. Just things that I have found very useful if you're looking at natural language processing and text analysis. Quid, which recently merged with NetBase, which is a social platform you may have heard of in the past, but they're one where you can collect earned media data, social data, bring it together and do some pretty neat text analytics. Brandwatch has a function there, and a company out of London called FactMatter. Really, if you're in government or crisis or looking at conversations, issues, FactMatter is really good. A really smart person put that one together. Monitoring tools, I still think you have your standards that are doing really well. You see a lot of merger and acquisition in this space. When I'm recommending purchasing a monitoring tool, I always ask them to pull data for the specific company. I make a lot of recommendations for our clients so they can actually look at the data, because they all have different data, and you'll find the one that has the best data for you. And those standards would be, your Cisions, your Meltwaters, etc. They all have different attributes as well. NewsWhip, if you haven't heard of that, a great tool for looking at news in a different way. You can set up custom dashboards. It has a little predictive analytics, so you can see when someone really starts chattering about a certain topic or issue. You can go in there and identify that quickly. Tagger is an influencer monitoring tool that I like a lot, that we use quite robustly, that you can plug in directly with the influencer to get data. Visualization, I think a couple common ones here: Tableau, Microsoft BI, many others. Those are the most common that we see used in organizations. And again, I think it's a skill set as you think about that data structure that I talked about earlier. Make sure you start looking at visualization. If it's not for yourself, if it's for people you're hiring, because we're asked more and more to contribute into maybe larger reports or do them ourselves in these formats. Some other ones out there: Proof Analytics, a fantastic tool. I think this is going to be huge in the future, that really correlates any data points together. A little bit more complex, but a great tool. Don't forget your Excel skills. Excel still can be very relevant, especially for small sets of data. I recommend people take classes if you don't know it very well. The very simple functions can save hours and hours and hours. And there's the free Google Data Studio as well. So some technology and tools for you to consider. But with that, I think we're close to time. I want to leave a lot of time for questions, but go out there and run down the future, because the future is bright for all of us, especially if you can weave in that great data measurement and analytics to show outcomes and show your true value. Thank you.
Well, fantastic. We'll open it up for questions now. Brent, I'm looking at the chat line, and I've got one input here from an individual. It's not really a question. They said they're interested in hearing more about the tools that might be available to them in measuring their output. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, there's many tools. I know budgets, some of these, like I said, they're growing in complexity, and with that also growing in expense. So I know they're not for everybody. I think the baseline tools again are the free ones, right? Get your Excel. I mean, not technically free, but usually everyone has access to it. Google Data Studio. There's some nice visualization tools out there as well. Making sure you set up your Google Analytics if you're in charge of that. And a lot of the social platforms, influencer platforms, are continually updating their backend analytics as well, that are making them more robust, more usable. And again, each of them is their own entity. So if you're in charge of YouTube, you have your YouTube Analytics Studio. Some aren't as robust, but make sure you know all the backends of these things that are already included as your business account for sure. Any of these other ones that are paid, all have their ups and downs. So if anybody has specific questions about anything, I'm not rather not make recommendations on this format right now. Um, Please let me know if there's any other specifics.
So Brent, we have a question from Betsy who says, for example, a small business or nonprofit with an annual budget of, let's say, $4 million, what should the expected expense on measurement data be? And she's asking for a range. I'm sure that there's some huge variability, but hoping to educate her own organization on what that expense slice of the pie should be.
Yeah, I think the most common is 10% of your budget. You're spending, because when we talk about measurement and analytics, it's proving value, but it's also, if you're doing it well, it's optimizing it so you do it better. So if you're at a nonprofit and I sit on a couple nonprofit boards myself, and a lot of the charge is, raising money. If we're able to show and determine what channels raise the most money most efficiently, it makes our organization better. It gives us the ability to go in and raise more money in a more efficient manner. So often, while we're talking about measurement here, the optimization function and the strategic function usually pays for that, oftentimes. So 10% is a baseline, and that's across industry. I'd use that if your organization isn't as bullish on metrics, go lower. We have some people spending 30+% of their budget because they are a data-driven organization and they know that they need to show value. So it really depends on your organization. 10 is sort of the baseline I use.
Fantastic. Hey, here's one from Monique. She wants to know if you can talk more about data collection from multiple sources and getting those into a single presentation. Example, you're taking data from Cision, Google Analytics, social stats. How do these combine into a single presentation?
Yeah. Depending on how robust your data is, I think this is the one thing, good question, Monique, that is getting more complex, even for medium or small organizations, because the data is becoming so robust, like I talked about. The very simple way is to export it into Excel and build it there. The plus one of that is export it into Google Sheets and pull it down into Google Data Studio. And this is the portion where I talked about that third element, where we really have to become a data-driven structure or strong comps data structure, is having the skill set to do that. So when you look at all this different data, it's going to have different measurables, of course, right? The Twitter data is not going to look the same as the earned media data. So you have to organize that in a very specific way. There's also third-party tools, funnel.io, many others out there that will help automate some of these processes, right? It will take your Google Analytics, it will take your AdWords, and pull it all into one place for you, where then you can massage it, do certain things with it, create a visualization within a tool like that. Often not too expensive, depending on the size of your organization. There's many marketing automation tools that will help with that, pull the data from different sources. So take a look, simple Google search, or I can make recommendations. I don't want to spend too much time on recommendations here.
Fantastic. And Brent, I'll begin this next question from Katie with her last words, which are a thank you. And her question is, or request is, she'd like to hear more about some best practices for communication dashboards, i.e., what makes a dashboard effective, who should see it, and how often should it be created?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the length. If it's not consumable, it's not worth very much. See a lot of reports again that are 10, 15, 20 pages that get taken and sort of put to the side very quickly because people who are reviewing them or who want to review them might not have a lot of time dedicated. So length is the first one. Make sure it's consumable and fit to your organization. Like I mentioned, if you work in a traditional accounting firm, for example, used to seeing data in Excel and dashboards in Excel. Not for everybody, but if people are used to seeing it that way, think about that. If you work in a visual organization, something as simple as PowerPoint. A few key factors that I always like to include is, ensuring that you have the insights and optimization in text somewhere, whether it's a small box, but what does this data mean? Because one thing we see a lot is, the chart looks good to you and it makes sense to you, or the dashboard looks good to you and makes sense to you. But someone who may be reviewing it, a CFO or someone like that, may not know what uh, social media engagement rate is. So be sure you provide context either, within the individual charts or within a separate section of insights or takeaways for next steps. And always tied to the data-driven story. There's some dashboards where if, for example, we have organizational objectives, hey, we want to be the best known company in making pencils by 2022, we will put a dot towards a little indicator of metrics that map back to that one goal. So make sure your data-driven story, either the one that you want to tell or maybe ladders up to the organization, is clear, but make it as clear and consumable as possible is the best recommendation.
Okay. This next one is from Jennifer. They're not giving you a chance to breathe here, Brent. So the question is, what kind of meta-analysis do you suggest to create a business goal-driven dashboard rather than simply a collection of tactical reports?
Yeah, and I think that is, a good question, Jennifer. The crux of what we're trying to do, and it really takes a conversation and a strategy session. You might have to set aside time to do this that you haven't done before. And it's not collecting the data. Before collecting the data, again, you have to define that role that you play within your organization, and you have to then define the goals that support that role. Right? My role is to create top line awareness of the company. So what are your goals going to be to achieve that, right? We're going to buy some paid ads. We're going to do earned media. Um, I'd say the best approach there, and that's why it's difficult for people to answer, is they don't spend time thinking about how they contribute to an organization, or they just say, we do everything and, we do 50 things and it's too hard. You're not going to get great measurement then. I know the realities of what they're trying to say, but people are actually doing this and doing this well, and any organization can do it, but you have to dedicate the time and say, we're going to redefine our role. And that may take some time and different channels you have to go through. You have to dedicate time to do that.
Okay, Brent, this next one is from Ian. He asks, and I love this, can you talk specifically about internal communications? What are the best metrics to track for employee engagement, like click rate, open rate, etc., and any specific tools that you recommend? And he also ends with a hearty thanks.
I think, internal communications is one that's changed a lot since COVID and remote work. One thing that we've seen people do and request a lot more, or we've been recommending, is pulse checks of their employees. That could be a number of different levels, right? So this would be a more robust and frequent survey to employees in this remote work environment, if you're in that environment, to make sure, for example, do they have the technology that they need? Do they feel supported? Do they have, are they aware of mental health services? Are they feeling burned out? I think that's one in internal communications, because that will also help you fuel what kind of communications you then can create internally. We've seen people say, hey, I didn't know we had mental health services that are available to me as an employee that are virtual, right? So the internal communications team go and start programming that towards that issue. So I think, sure, that the engagements and the open rates and sort of your content metrics are important for channel performance. But I think in this time particularly, a lot of it is about context and feelings and emotion and things like diversity, mental health, and some of these larger issues are really playing a lot into that. So going deeper if you can with surveys, focus groups, whatever it may be, we found really effective in this current environment.
Yeah, Brent, I appreciate you bringing up the darker issues during these rather dark times. There's a lot of relevance there. Hey, I'm going to throw out the final question, which is from our host, who just popped up on the screen, from Andrea, who asked earlier via chat about showing the portion of PR contributions in a multi-party outcome. And Andrea, please feel free to elaborate on that if you'd like.
Does that make sense, Brent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's something common, right? You have multiple people and they're all leading to sales, right? Or they're all leading to increased awareness. I'll give you one example, a way we did that. It's doable. But again, when we talk about budget and resources, that's something we have to consider. A couple ways to do it. One, the most efficient way to do it is probably through a survey, right? So we had one client who works in hospitality, just leave it at that. They have guests come into their facilities, and they wanted to know the impact of all these different channels, paid, earned, owned, everything across the board. In that survey, in and of itself, they found that earned media was driving more interest, more purchase intent than any of the other channels. And that's by asking their consumers or their target audiences, right? I think the best way, and people often forget, is if you want to know what your consumers or how something impacts you, ask your target audience. Mm-hmm. And then they started devoting more budget there. Yeah. Another way, if it's digital, their services, I'll throw out another vendor there, Group RFZ, that you can place a pixel on your content. So if you have a piece of content that is absorbed by somebody, that could be an ad, that could be a piece of influencer content too. They can turn back a survey to you and show you how that influenced purchase. You could ask, hey, did this influence your purchase? What do you think about the company? And then the last, more complex, is correlation analytics. Goes a little bit deeper. That Proof Analytics does that I mentioned earlier, where you can actually statistically correlate, hey, there were 300 media mentions and sales grew by 500%. You also have to have that other siloed data. So it has to be a more organizational effort. As you can imagine, Andrea, if you want to show your piece of the pie, you sort of have to have the whole pie in front of you.
Sure. Thank you, Brent. I want to wrap us up here. This has been extraordinarily valuable to everybody. Some people were asking in the chat, can we get the presentation afterwards? Yes, Brent has given us permission to do that. And his contact information will be in the presentation too, as a reminder. And we'll be putting the whole video on our website afterwards. So we'll send you an email with a link to that. It's prsamidcolumbia.org.